former congressperson made me his right-hand man for about 3 months.
Comedian and expert troll Ben Palmer is back with another absolute banger featuring Florida Republican Congressman Ted Yoho.
Former congressperson Ted Yoho reached out to what he thought was Parler, asking for help to launch his new show, God, Country, Family.
If Yoho's name rings a bell, it's probably because of this.
Mr. Yoho had some real issues with Ms. Ocasio-Cortez's position on police reform, crime, criminal justice, and specifically, as you mentioned, her position that the police should be defunded and that the kind of the root of the spike in crime in New York is unemployment, is poverty. It is a lack of funding for social programs. He said that she was disgusting for holding that position, that she was way out of line.
What did he say? According to you?
F and B.
You don't need to be an HR expert to know that calling your coworker an effing B would not be tolerated in any workplace, let alone amongst elected officials in Congress, prompting Yoho to issue this disingenuous non-apology, if we're being honest.
Having been married for 45 years with 2 daughters, I'm very cognizant of my language. The offensive name-calling words attributed to me by the press were never spoken to my colleagues, and if they were construed that way, I apologize for their misunderstanding. I cannot apologize for my passion or for loving my God, my family, and my country. I yield back.
Which then led AOC to shred Yoho.
This is not new, and that is the problem. This is a pattern of an attitude towards women and dehumanization of others. And I will not stay up late at night waiting for an apology from a man who has no remorse over calling women and using abusive language towards women. But what I do have issue with is using women, our wives and daughters, as shields and excuses for poor behavior. Mr. Yoho mentioned that he has a wife and 2 daughters. I am 2 years younger than Mr. Yoho's youngest daughter. I am someone's daughter, too.
Now that we've gotten a taste of who Yoho is, let's get back to Ben Palmer and his partnership, per se, with Yoho.
I mean, the ignorance out there is just amazing.
Yeah, there are a lot of just ignorant people. Completely. And it's like the stuff is happening right in front of them, and they're just like totally ignorant. It's just like, you know what I mean? Like, and it's just...
They fall for anything.
Teaming up with TYT's very own Walter Masterson, the pair would follow Yoho to a CEO summit held at Liberty University, of all places, bumping elbows with the former president of Ghana and other rich and powerful people before Liberty University staff wised up and recognized Walter Masterson, kicking him out of the event and leaving Palmer behind with Yoho to continue the mission.
She goes, "You have the film crew here?" I said, "Yeah." And they go, "Okay." She goes, "We thought they might be the TikTok disruptors." Because TikTok is Chinese.
So we left campus and went back the next day to interview former presidential candidate Michelle Bachmann. When Ted and Michelle started the interview, I interrupted them to talk about the things Ted and I talked about on our very first phone call.
And this is where Palmer's brilliance really shows off.
Gun safety program to go into the schools. Of course, none of the schools, really wanted to do that.
Maybe if there were more shooting ranges inside the schools, that way all that aggression, you skip right past the lunchroom, right to the shooting range, get some target practice in. Even if the targets were, 6-year-old boys and girls as the targets, if that saves a life, then hey.
Well, and have the parents come out with you.
The fact that a former sitting congressman had all these conversations after sending a contact email to a fake website trolling Parler users should be enough evidence to bar him from holding public office again. And that's not even mentioning the Sacha Baron Cohen-inspired contracts both he and Michelle Bachmann signed to protect Palmer from the legal action he knew Yoho would be seeking.
Michelle's papers. You guys not leaving here until we get her papers. I want to call the police.
But he didn't give up and even tried to close our camera guy in the door, and accused us of attacking him when he realized he had a minor cut on his hand.
This is all disingenuous. And in the process, they attacked me, and I got hurt. And I hope you have good insurance.
Oh, wait a second. Hold on.
This is the icing on the cake from Palmer, because he even got Yoho to admit for the first time that he did in fact call AOC a effing B.
And he said, "Did you call her an F and B?" And I said, "No comment." But truth is, as I walked away by myself, I said, "What a F and B."
After speaking with the police and showing them footage of the scuffle with Yoho, Palmer and his crew declined to press any charges, and everyone went their separate ways. But not before Palmer sent this email. To add insult to injury, Yoho did threaten to sue Palmer if he posted any of this footage online, but as we saw, Palmer has the contracts and receipts to back up his project. As of 2018, the last election cycle before Yoho retired in 2020, Open Secrets reports that he had an estimated net worth of over $3 million. Talk about coaches.
With the rumors circulating today about a specific job opening, what do you have to say about your future in Aggieland?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty selfish of you to ask me that question.
This is Jim Schlossnagle, Texas A&M's head baseball coach for 3 seasons.
To be honest with you, but I left my family to be the coach at Texas A&M. I took the job at Texas A&M to never take another job again. And that hasn't changed in my mind. That's unfair to talk about something like that. That'd be like you asking Montgomery if he's going to sign in the draft. But I understand you got to ask the question. But I gave up a big part of my life to come take this job, and I've poured every ounce of my soul in this job, and I've given this job every single ounce I can possibly give it. So write that.
Coach, thank you very much.
Wow. So a strong response from Schlossnagle, who has compiled a record of 135-62. Clearly, he believes the question was completely out of the blue and uncalled for. After all, his Texas A&M Aggies lost on June 24th in the College World Series to the Tennessee Volunteers in a very, let's be clear, very hard-fought series. It was also heartbreaking the way that it ended, as Tennessee bounced back from a Game 1 loss to win 2 straight and become the first #1 national seed in the NCAA tourney to win the title since Miami in 1999. It seems evident that Schlossnagle needs time. He gave the image and painted the picture that this is difficult to rebound from. And the question is inappropriate, right? Then this happened.
So Jim Schlossnagle dominated the news cycle on Tuesday. For those who maybe were living under a rock, Jim Schlossnagle was the head baseball coach at Texas A&M. He is now the head baseball coach at Texas. Now, what makes this interesting is Texas A&M was 7 outs away from winning the College World Series on Sunday night. Then Tennessee forced a Game 3. Then Tennessee beats them by a run in the deciding game on Monday. On Tuesday, Schlossnagle is announced as the Texas coach.
It's true. Schlossnagle, after giving that fiery speech in the name of loyalty, bolted for rival Texas, who play in the same exact conference.
His answer was embarrassing. All you have to say is, listen, we just walked off the field where we gave our guts, left our guts on that field, and all I care about tonight is my players. And I mean, make a stand. Instead, he chastised the reporter. It was all about him. I left my family behind for this job. It's the last job I'll ever have, and look, 19 hours later, it's being reported by multiple outlets in Texas that he's leaving.
Exactly. It is embarrassing. It is very embarrassing. Schlossnagle not only went after a reporter for clearly asking a very valid question on the subject, but then pledged allegiance to the Texas A&M Aggies and says it is the only place for him, which quite honestly reminds us of this.
I'm very proud to be endorsed by President Trump. I'm running to help him drain the swamp and build the wall. I'm Tommy Tuberville, and I approve this message because I won't back down.
Former football coach and current Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville.
Hey, I was a football coach. I dealt with more minorities than everybody in this building.
Who has given so many wild quotes, it's hard to keep up. Tuberville pulled a Schlossnagel back in his day a few times. If you have no idea what I am talking about, I'm about to tell you. While head coach with the Texas Tech Red Raiders, Tuberville stepped away from a dinner with several recruits and assistant coaches, and he never returned to the table. The next morning, they would learn, and many would learn, really being caught off guard and utterly surprised, that that man accepted an offer to become the next head coach at the University of Cincinnati with the Bearcats. While serving within the same position and same title at Ole Miss, Tuberville gave a quote that will live in infamy when he said, "They'll have to carry me out of here in a pine box." Okay. Some 48 hours later, after making this very strong statement, Tommy Tuberville would step onto a private jet that was sent from Charles Barkley's alma mater, Auburn University, and take the job after all. Mississippi Today would write, turns out no pine box was required. The outlet would then write, in one of Auburn's luxurious private jets, swept from the cow fields of northern Mississippi to the plains of central Alabama, where he was introduced as the Tigers' coach at a news conference with a salary of nearly $1 million, doubling his pay at Ole Miss. For Schlossnagel, here was his introductory presser. Go for it.
Of it being a last job. And then you said that your mind hadn't changed beyond that. So, number one, what changed? And then number two, what would you say to those Texas A&M people that supported you that feels like that you intentionally misled them?
Well, I didn't intentionally mislead them.
What do you mean? What do you mean? How? I didn't intentionally mislead them. I just gave this harrowing story about how I sacrificed so much for my family and I left them behind to take this job. I bleed for Texas A&M. My heart is here. My life is here. I took this job because it is my dream job. Your question is preposterous and silly. And then he takes the Texas job. Can't write this stuff, man. Sports. So John McClain, a longtime media member, would tweet this. The first thing Jim Schlossnagel should do is call the Texas Ags reporter, that being Richard Zane, and apologize for insulting him about his question about the Longhorns' job after the defeat. Schlossnagel will never have any credibility again except in Austin.
Okay, people have been telling me for years it will not take long to develop Texas fatigue as they join the SEC. Mark me down, fresh off the golf course in 100-plus degree weather, that I have Texas fatigue. They fire their coach on the day that their rival Texas A&M is playing in the College Baseball World Series. So they distract their rival on National Championship Monday. I left my family for Texas A&M in this job. I've given my all, blah, 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 blah. And then less than 24 hours, that condescending coach, who I will not say his name, slides over and takes the job in Texas. That just doesn't feel good. So as an old SEC guy, welcome to the league. And I promise you on football Saturdays, whether you're playing in Starkville or in Nashville or in Athens or in Auburn or in Tuscaloosa or in Baton Rouge or Knoxville or Gainesville or any other ville that's been in the SEC for a while, just put me down as this.
Jim Dunaway would unload on the move and the politics behind it. There is so much here. And if Jim Schlossnagle indeed wants to make this right, though a lot of people are reserving their judgments because they already possess them. I agree with Mr. McLean that he should call up the reporter and apologize. Or if he truly believes that he did not mislead them, own it. Own the villain role. And, let's be clear, when all is said and done, if he wins, no one will care because they will say he made the right move. There are tennis greats like Federer, Serena, Nadal, King, Bjork, and Graf, to name a few. Then there's Althea Gibson.
It was Gibson who broke tennis's color barrier in the 1950s and changed the game forever.
Gibson was a trailblazer, and as tennis season is in full swing, it is wise to revisit a very important piece of history. A sharecropper's daughter in the cotton fields of South Carolina, her family would make their way out of the state as they were part of the Great Migration, which estimated 6 million black folks moved from the South to the northern, Midwestern, and Western states to escape the oppression of Jim Crow.
At the state and local level, white Southern Democrats implement laws to suppress the political and economic gains made by African Americans. Under the Separate but Equal Clause, the U.S. Supreme Court legitimizes segregation and social discrimination.
She would grow up in Harlem, as the Saturday Review's Quentin Reynolds wrote of in his 1958 column, "You had to fight to survive." Unfortunately, they moved to what would be known as the lung block of New York City, with a high rate of tuberculosis. It was depicted as one of the most notorious slums in all of New York City. Tall and athletic was Althea Gibson. Her father wanted her to become a boxer. They'd train on the rooftop, though it turned into beatings for Gibson. She would run away from home because of it. Per her autobiography, she headed to the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, which gave her shelter. She would thrive in basketball with the Mysterious Girls Athletic Club of New York, providing some foreshadowing later on in her career, which we will visit. Viewed as the best squad in the state, white teams would refuse to play them. You probably know why. At 10, she would discover paddle tennis. 2 years later, she was New York's paddle tennis champion. Just to give an idea of the times, tennis, like society, was segregated. Gibson would say, "I always wanted to be somebody. If I made it, it's half because I was game enough to take an awful lot of punishment along the way, and half because there were an awful lot of people who cared enough to help me." Musician Buddy Walker noticed Gibson's skill set and how good she was, and took her to the Harlem Cosmopolitan Club, where she impressed members so much they bought her a junior membership. She would wow people left and right with her skills. That's when this man, the one-arm Fred Johnson, was her coach at the club, which was black owned. She was so good and beat so many at the club that members of the Cosmo sent her to tourneys around the country, sponsored by the American Tennis Association, a league for black players. She'd skip class in her preteens, then drop out of high school by the age of 18. At 19, she reached the All-Black American Tennis Association National Finals. Although she came in second, Hubert Eaton, a black doctor, saw her potential and took her in with his family to the state of North Carolina, offering her room, board, and education. Walter Whirlwind Johnson would introduce her to the summer tennis circuit. In the Jim Crow South, Gibson was forced to sit apart from white folks at the movies, on buses, and she attended all-black schools. The only tennis court allowed for black people was one that belonged to her mentor. Funny enough, she did not want to go to Wilmington initially. That was until the great boxer Sugar Ray Robinson encouraged her. So she did. In 1949, she would graduate in the top of her class, receiving a college scholarship. She went to Florida A&M and HBCU and even starred in basketball for the school. She'd also win 10 straight ATA titles, but never received the invitation to compete in a Grand Slam, as it was, well, invitation only. Quick shout out to Elise Marble, who wrote an open letter demanding Gibson's inclusion. Marble took on the establishment herself previously and was a former world number one. She won U.S. Nationals 4 times in her career. Thus, in the year 1950, Gibson broke the color barrier at the U.S. Nationals, the top amateur championship in the country. Competing on a side court, she would beat her competition in straight sets. Think about that as well. She would go on to win, but as you watch Wimbledon and other tennis tournaments, you see what the side courts look like. That is the level of disrespect that they received. At the tournaments, Angela Buxton, Gibson's future doubles partner, would say her competitors would hardly speak a word to Althea Gibson. She was isolated. She was lonely in these times. To give an idea, she would have to change in her car and use her automobile as a dinner table. On tour, she was denied rooms at hotels. One refused to book reservations for a luncheon in her honor. While in 1956, she would win the French Open, the first African American to do so. And yet, even as she dominated in the sport, she was continually excluded from social functions by her white peers. A year later, she made history yet again at Wimbledon, becoming the first black player to win. The Queen presented her the trophy. Quite an image. She would receive a hero's welcome in her city of New York. However, in Chicago, my place of residence, hotels still refused to provide her with a room. To top it off, she would win what is known as the U.S. Open, becoming the first black tennis player to win it. She'd also climbed to number 1, the first black woman to ever do so. In doubles, she'd win 3 straight Wimbledon titles in 1956, 57, and 58. She'd repeat as winner of Wimbledon and the US Open the following year, including doubles. So to tally that, she won in 3 years 11 majors. Even with her accomplishments, the predominantly white sports media refused to acknowledge just how great of a player Althea Gibson was. She'd win more than 50 singles and doubles titles, earning the label of the Jackie Robinson of tennis. Sadly, when she left the sport, she would struggle financially. She made ends meet, touring with the Harlem Globetrotters. Yes, it is true. She was also a successful singer, whose tunes you can search on YouTube and various other platforms. And to add on to the accolades, she then became a professional golfer, even setting the course record at the Venice Open years prior. At Florida A&M, she tried out for golf and shot 100. This also marked the first time an African American competed on the women's tour. She'd do this from 1963 to 1977, later becoming a tennis instructor in the state of New Jersey. She'd also work as a community representative for a national baking company. In addition to that, she also ran for Senate in the state of New Jersey. She would get 23% of the vote and eventually losing to popular bar owner and former Senate President Pat Todd. In 2003, unfortunately, her health declined. She had suffered 2 cerebral aneurysms and a stroke prior to her passing. She is a legend, she is a pioneer, and she was unapologetically herself. The Williams sisters would cite her as inspiration. Many say Gibson broke open the door for the next wave of athletes, and specifically tennis players, breaking the barriers of an all-white sport for a better tomorrow. As I reflect on Althea Gibson and her legacy, I say this: it is really, really unfortunate that someone of her ilk, who was so successful, had to deal with the levels of racism that no one should endure. We did a piece a few days ago on Reggie Jackson saying he wouldn't wish this on anybody. Amen to that. And the theme that I have seen over and over again from successful black athletes of yesteryears, how no matter how many championships they won, no matter the accolades, no matter the success, they still struggled financially. It is a shameful past that many in the current political climate wish that we do not learn about. And that is why it is so very important to tell these stories.